Welcome on in, everyone. This is Defused. This week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the state of gaming in 2023, about what developers are doing and what current trends we see in the gameplays that we like, dislike, and where we'd like to see the gaming community as a whole try to move towards to make the whole experience better for everyone involved. Joining me this week is Cortenyde and Barbaric. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Doing well. I was punctual as always.
Cortenyde, that is a bold-faced lie. You're basically never on time, but we love you anyway.
I love me as well.
So, I think the first topic, we've all discussed this, we've all talked about it, is early access. And I really wanted Barb to start this one because I think me and Barbarian looked forward to Kerbal Space Program 2 quite a bit because it's a very relaxing, fun game.
Yeah.
It went into early access, and whilst that nomenclature of early access is accurate, it is beyond disappointing. What are your thoughts on the early access environment right now overall, Barbarians?
If a AAA developer is involved, it's probably just a cash grab. If it's an indie developer, there's a possibility it's okay, or it might be a cash grab. I'd say it's probably about 3/4 absolute crap, and about a quarter people trying to make art.
Yeah, I mean, the cash grab is an interesting thing, and I almost support it more out of indie developers than I would AAA studios, because if it's an indie studio, they may factually need the runway to get moving forward. And Court, you just started working at a smaller studio, so I'm sure this is a topic that your new company covers, is runway and when we have to start looking at monetization.
Yeah, it's well, monetization, or at least funding, is one of the key elements of why someone would go early access. So like an indie developer, for example, and I'm talking about an individual. So I have a couple of examples of that. There is a game called Spanky, which I'm really looking forward to, which is kind of, it's a kind of a tag game. The kind of gimmick of it is that everyone's got a large butt and you can bounce on your butt, like to jump higher, and it's kind of just a very silly low
One of those
game.
really crazy games that you like.
Yeah, pretty much. But look, I found the game on TikTok, and that's probably the best way for somebody to advertise their game, especially as an indie dev, to get there, to get a lot of hype very quickly. Because you look back 12 years ago, the indie scene was essentially 2D platformers, and maybe some point and click games. Now you're seeing fully fledged games come out from indie developers. So, between a AAA studio, they'll have hundreds, if not a couple of thousand, if not thousands, working for them. Whole teams, whole departments on art, or 3D modeling. And then, an indie developer like my studio, there's 4 of us. There's 2 developers, a biz dev, who's also the CEO, and me, who is a community manager, content creator, and marketing manager. So, like, you wear a lot of hats when you're an indie dev. And so if that's down to one person, that's a lot harder to do. I think the problem is, and, I'll obviously leave this open so I don't cover everything at once, but there's a couple of things that people overstretch themselves. That's a big problem of it, is creating something that's far too ambitious for their means, especially if it's like their first game. They're doing it in their spare time. They're doing it as a self project, or maybe they've got a little bit of funding from an incubator. But money, when it comes to gaming, is done through publishers, angel investment, profit share, equity investors. and there's a lot of different avenues you can go down. But at the end of the day, or like Kickstarter, for example, but at the end of the day, there is always somebody who's going to be at the other end of that. So you're either going to have to release the game, or it's gonna have to perform fucking well. The other thing is people announcing games really early to try and build hype, to try and get investment and try and get money early in. So there's a game called Last Man Sitting, small indie game, one developer, announced it in 2020. It's a battle royale game, but everyone's in office chairs. And it looks hilarious, right? It doesn't seem like that hard of a concept, but that was 2020. And I looked on the page the other day, and he says, well, it looks like it won't come out for another few years. So by the time that game's released, it will be dead in the water. What he could do is release the alpha or the beta that he has now and go on early release. The problem with that is that could, what he would get from that is probably more funding from actual people buying the game. But the problem with that is if he's releasing a product that is underwhelming or underpromised or, underdeveloped, then it ends up that they'll lose that player base or the faith in that. So it kind of undoes all of that hype.
Right. And that's, I think, my largest problem with early access, the way it's being used right now, especially in like the survival space, is you look around and a lot of these games are coming out early access, but it feels, especially on the larger game side of things, it feels like they'd rather use us as a game testing group so that their audience now becomes all the play testers and they just get to hack out that part of their production line on the bigger game side. And it's extremely frustrating because it seriously affects the launch and like what we're looking at in the game. In KSP, the physics is a mess and it's a game about physics. In Sons of the Forest, the story is just not present because they wanted to get the gameplay down. It's almost like big companies are using early access to drag out the process of production, make us do the playtesting and not give us the final product until they're ready instead of doing all that work in-house.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that because there's a couple of rules about early access on Steam, which both Lara and I looked at in when we were talking about early access together, because we both think that it's overutilized or overused, right, and used incorrectly, because there are games that are on early access that have been out on early access or in beta or whatever for absolutely years.
We're not looking at you, 7 Days to Die.
And I'm actually just on the page now. I'm just having a look. And one of the rules for it was, is it okay to raise my price? This is coming soon. I'm trying to find the sentence because I don't want to like give false information. But essentially, you can charge for early access. You can charge. It says you can raise your price, but you can't. You're not allowed to kind of sell, for example, DLC on early access, which is what a lot of games will still do. Is they'll claim to be early access and sell DLCs.
I was going to say that can't be a hard rule because like all the early access games I hate sell DLC and they're still in early access.
Well, this is it. I think the problem with it is that there's not enough. I'm not a big fan of regulation and just to say, oh, it needs to be regulated. But it seems to be a category in which people can put their game out as early access, and it's just there's no moderation whatsoever. And you can see there's asset flips, loads of them on Steam, that are able to kind of run freely without much moderation. Even though when you have a game, it has to go through a review process for Steam.
So that's almost like a Steam terms of service issue. Like, does Steam need to step in and like curtail some of these early access monikers? Because some of these games don't need to be in early access. Some of them have enough of the storyline developed that they can be a full game. Other games probably shouldn't come out or should release in a different manner in order to get that moniker. Like, I think one of my favorite examples of early access done the way that it's kind of being done right now is Grounded, where they staggered the launch and curtailed your progress so you couldn't advance in the story past what is out and available. Whereas Sons of the Forest, you beat the whole game and half the story is still missing. Like me and you played it court and I went back and played it solo. There's a boss at the end of it that we never saw when I beat it the first time with you. That just does a disservice to the gamer because he's missing half the story and you're allowing him to feel like he finished the game and it's unfulfilling.
I mean, what would you prefer? Okay, would you prefer a game to be delayed by a year or two and then have a fully fledged title, even if it's an indie title? Or would you rather have the game and then, you know, I guess try and dredge through the issues that might happen throughout the game?
I mean, perfect world, I think my idea of what I would prefer in early access is the path that Diablo 4 and Dark and Darker are taking, where they do beta test 1 weekend or 2 weekends, 2 or 3 times a quarter. So it gives me a snippet. It lets me inside. It let me see it, but I can't get enough of it to like finish it or feel like I'm done with the game. It's just a sample. I think it builds a little bit of hype. It lets me see the game development progress so that I know that it's becoming a full game. So that when they finally say it's out, it's done, it's complete, and we don't have a rash of half-finished launches or poorly performing launches that we've seen. I mean, just in the last month with the port to Jedi Survivor and Redfall, there's been a lot of criticism about those games just not performing. And it's not a new issue. It goes back to Cyberpunk. And even before then, the early access shouldn't be playtesting. I'd like to see small snippet of game to keep me interested. But when the game finally comes out, it should be done so that I can consume that content, enjoy it, and be done with it without having that like bad taste in my mouth of bad ports or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree with the beta testing, because I think if your core player base and community is saying, hey, this is where we've been able to play the game, and then this is what we think about it, you need to do X, Y, and Z, you then have a stronger basis for delay. Delays are never great. I mean, look, the game that I'm working on at the moment was supposed to be released in 2020. It's now 2023. But the game has expanded and changed drastically, and has become a better game because of that. We switched engines, so we've upgraded to Unreal 5. Mechanics, items, quests, puzzles, general utility, and modeling has all changed. So the game has essentially matured or expanded from the initial ambition of it. And that's really my job, is to communicate that, is to create discourse around why there may be a delay. It makes it a little bit more difficult because you do lose a lot of that momentum, and it's very hard to get back once the initial momentum has kind of lost steam. No pun intended. But yeah, it's a little bit harder. So I think one of my biggest issues is with early access is announcing way too early or using early access to release a game, and then upon completion, the game's essentially completed, keeping it on early access, because it gives. I think what it can do is gives a lot of studios benefit of the doubt, because people say,
like a safety blanket.
Access. Yeah, and they'll just keep it on there.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no top end for early access, which is crazy. You know, that there's no top end for it to say, right, you've got this amount to develop. And I also think
right, like no one's on a ticking time clock. Like if you were to say, okay, if you release early access, you have 6 months to be a full access game.
Yeah,
type of situation.
Like I would say 2 years. That would be what I would say.
That's long.
It is a long time. You're right, but games take a longer time than I think most people think to develop, especially if like you're like I would put that time in place not for AAA games. I think for a AAA studio to release an early access game is because a lot of the times these studios aren't developers, they're publishers.
Right.
You know? They may have in-house development, but like, okay, so there's no middle ground. There's no name for the middle ground publisher / developer. So
right.
you have indie developers, which are generally small companies or individuals who are creating games. And then we have AAA, which it's supposed to be gold standard games, which I think we've had a big issue with that recently. And I think really what that is the spread and rise of things like PC gaming and new tech coming through so quickly because people are wanting to push their systems a lot faster. You know, like for example, ray tracing, particle physics, new engines, realism, you know, a lot of these new engines that are being developed have been developed over in the last 3 to 5 years. You know, if you think back to how gaming was for, a good 10 years, it was very similar. It hadn't changed. And
you talk about like realism. Have either of you seen that video of? It looks like straight body cam footage.
Oh my
realism.
God, that's so scary.
It is like me personally. I don't want my game to be that. No. I want to have a disconnect from reality. I want it to have some graphic that lets me know. Unrecord is the name of the game. I want to have that separation from reality and my game, but that game's graphics is beyond real. It just looks so amazing. But that's part of, I made this point on development timeline too, where because of how long a lot of these games take, you have situations where like Unreal Engine 5 just came out. If you've been in development of a game, say 2.5, 3 years right now, Unreal Engine 5 comes out. Do you port over and try to upgrade as you're building, or do you stay the course? Like, this is a big concern. Whereas I feel like in the early 2000s, they were pumping out games a lot faster. Maybe the development was going on a little bit longer than people realized, but like GTA came out every other year. Call of Duty comes out every year.
I haven't seen a new GTA in over a decade.
It's been a decade now.
So yeah, I wouldn't hold that up as a development.
Well, I said the early 2000s. They're not immune from this thing I'm talking about. Development feels like it's taking a lot longer, and that technology push Court is talking about is happening in the middle of game development now. So and I think it helps and hurts.
That's kind of like a double whammy kind of question and answer at the same time, because essentially what's happened is, I mean, look, the people who were developing games back in, let's say, the 90s, the people who could afford to do it were generally bigger studios. You did get indie games, but they were relegated to, let's say, the internet. You didn't really have indie games on consoles. You know, it was you'd get smaller games that would be on PC, and it'd really be only the enthusiasts that would play them. Indie game studios nowadays, in terms of the big boys, the expectation of what a AAA game is and to retain a AAA title is so vast in terms of gameplay. You know, a standard gameplay for a AAA game is 40 hours minimum. That's anything under that, it feels like money down the drain for the consumer.
You got shorted.
Exactly. What people expect from graphically, you know, within gameplay, narratively, you know, and so not only, if you talk about GTA, let's use GTA as a benchmark, because I think that's a really good one. You know, you think about how long Red Dead Redemption 2 was in development for, and look how much work they put in to even animating horse testicles. You know, they went granular with it. Now you imagine how many years? 5 years on. You know, there's obviously a separate team that has been working on GTA. You think about how big GTA 5 was and think then, okay, what's the scale of GTA 6 with all of these new engines, with these new specs and the new hardware that's been put into place with the next gen consoles? I don't think they'd probably do a switch up of it. However, the expectation from the player and for the studio to create a game that will last another decade, it takes a lot longer to produce these games just from the actual breadth of what the game takes to make and what people's expectations are, because it's got to top the last one.
Right.
I mean, you think about GTA 3 when that came out. That was the first 3D GTA. The next year they topped it with more cars, with I think swimming mechanics, because in the first one, if you touched what you died, more weapons.
Yep. Absolutely.
The next one after that, you had farming, you had a bodybuilding system, a weight system, turf warfare, a map that was probably about 3 to 5 times the size of GTA 3. Now, you put that against GTA 5 and then what GTA 6 could be, and then add on those hardware changes. And you know the speed in which the technology changes. You have to make sure that it not only matches up to your current gen, but will be playable for another decade on what we are now. Like I guess the 1980.
I do love the idea that you have to expand and improve on the franchise time over time. Personally, I do a lot of I care more about the storyline. I don't want the online service. I know there's a lot of people that love the online service games and want the longevity of a decade out of a game. That's not me personally. I would rather a quicker turnaround of a really good story that develops. But like in the terms of like expanding on the franchise and improving, Kerbal Space Program 2 looks gorgeous, but they destroyed all the physics, which is the core heart of the game. And Barbaric, I don't know what the current state of the game is. I haven't been on in a minute, but like I feel like they're right on the edge of killing their franchise because the follow-up doesn't have the basics that the last one.
Well, I mean, it's a completely different dev team. They pretty much stripped out the entire team. No one who worked on the first one's working on the second one, plus it's a new publisher. Take-Two Interactive, and known to be very money-oriented rather than creating a lasting...
To put it lightly.
So I don't see KSP2.
So you don't think KSP2
ever
turns around?
I think maybe in 5 to 6 years. And at that point, they're going to split it into multiple DLCs, and you're going to have to pay for the game 4 more times. And yes, there'll be some...
I mean, that is another question. Like, what is the threshold for you guys for a DLC to be worth money? Like me personally, if the base game is complete and enticing, a DLC has to add a equivalent dollar amount of content to that. So if the base game was $60, I should get a third of the hours in a DLC in a story format that is just as engaging. The perfect example for me on this is Outer Wilds. Amazing game. The DLC for Outer Wilds is almost a standalone game. It's within the first game, but it's a completely separate storyline that has a completely different set of engagement that is worth that money to me. But some games just Arc does maps. They do map packs for their DLC. Is that worth DLC? Is just adding new features like cars worth DLC? What's the cutoff for you guys when it comes to DLC in a game?
I personally don't care for... Well, I say I don't care for cosmetic DLC. I have bought cosmetic DLC. I wouldn't necessarily call that it is. I guess it is DLC though, but
more of an in-game purchase, maybe.
In-game purchase, yeah. I mean, I think when it comes down to, it really depends. It really does, because I mean, you can say that the maps are in-game purchases, which they are. You know, For me, I would, if it's a narrative game, I would want it to be, let's say a game is 40 hours. I'd want the DLC to last at least 15, you know? I have bought DLC in the past where it's been like an add-on to it, and it's been like 4 hours worth of gameplay. One of my buddies who is, he's a Harry Potter TikToker. His TikTok videos are all about Harry Potter.
Right.
He was playing Hogwarts Legacy, and then he bought the DLC, completed the Hogwarts Legacy, bought the DLC, and then made a video about it the day after, and had completed it within 4 hours.
And yeah, so it's kind of like me, where like I want the equivalency of the dollar amount. And like I've always looked at gaming this way, and I think gaming, while being kind of expensive, is a really great deal entertainment wise for gamers, because $20 gets you a 3-hour movie in the movie theater entertainment wise now. So for like $60, gamers are getting, well, now in some cases $80. You're getting significantly more than that 3 hours. Like your dollar per hour of entertainment is higher in gaming, but gamers are very picky about how expensive those games are getting.
Well, it used to be expansion packs, didn't it?
Yeah, expansion packs and like free content bonuses used to come out, and I feel those are getting significantly less because, I mean, at the end of the day, money is a thing for these companies. They need to make the money to make the game, but there's a give and take in that. And saw a lot of articles over the past couple of weeks that there's been a lot of pushback at the $80 price point that games are trying to move to, where PlayStation and Xbox stores have seen a lot of reduced purchases by volume because of that shift to the $80 price point. So that might be a pushback on the market that could keep games a little bit more inexpensive for us. But if that happens, developers are going to continue to look for ways to either give us in-game purchases, expansions, DLCs, other ways to make the gaining of money more palatable to the gamers that are out there. I did want to get Barbarian's answer on the, like, what is DLC that's worth purchasing, and what do you think game companies need to stop trying to shove down your throat as DLC?
I'm going to answer the second part first. Loot boxes need to fuck right off. Paid loot boxes.
That's fair.
And I mean, anything that gives you an advantage in the game that makes the game pay to win, pretty unacceptable as DLC. I think DLC should be limited to cosmetic items and story expansions. And I do mean actual story expansions. A lot of games like to, or at least it seems like a lot of games like to cut apart a base game and then sell the last quarter of the story as DLC, which, you know, suspiciously comes out a month and a half after the game released, so you know that they, you know, developed it in conjunction with the game as the base game.
Right.
It's not something that they went, oh, this is great, people like this, they want more, okay, we'll develop it more. They always planned on cutting the game into pieces and selling it over and over, and that's...
Well, so on that mark, do you think there's a difference between, let's say, the game adding another story very quickly? Like, if the base game has a story that's like complete and full, it has a finished storyline, but then a DLC comes out quickly that adds another piece or an offshoot to that storyline, do you think that's deceptive, or do you think that's just they wrote that part of the story, and as soon as that creator finished that storyline, he started working on the DLC, so development happened at the same time, but they knew they were separate and intertwined storylines?
I mean, that depends on each thing.
As a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, that's not something you could say, oh, all of them are this or all of them are this.
Yeah, it is hard to generalize in that, I guess.
Because I know there was a game, and I can't remember which game it was, but I read it the other day, that you could only get so far and you had to pay for the kind of last chapter. Now that's deceptive, but I remember Last of Us Part 1, I got the remaster on PS4 back in 2014, 2015. And I played through the main game, and then there was an extra DLC, which was from Ellie's point of view, and it was a good chunk.
Ellie's story.
Yeah, and that was really cool because it gave us a little bit more insight into the character. Yes, it was kind of entwined with it, and they could have put that in the main game, but it was a separate story in and itself.
Oh yeah,
You know?
right. I think that's a great case of DLC too, and it came out years later. They clearly wrote it. Probably, I mean, I doubt they sat on that immediately and then.
In those big studios, I think this process happens a lot where you have the creative team that builds the storyline, and then that storyline goes to the developers who build the game, and that creative team that worked on storyline is sitting there thinking like, well, our job's kind of done. What do we want to do next? And they're like, well, there's this story that is related. And I feel like that back and forth in production happens a lot. So a lot of these DLCs are worked on at the same time, but they're not necessarily what the first vision and direction of the game was. I do understand that that's a very difficult line or hard, fast rule to make as to when the story should have been in the original game versus DLC. The loot boxes, I consider those more in-game purchases than DLC because it's nothing substantive to the game. It doesn't add anything. The pay to win is garbage. There's no other way to put it. Like, I understand why developers came up with this idea, I think. Because if you think of it, you got these guys that, so there's people like us that stream. So we have time in our schedule that we kind of always dedicate to gaming every week. But there's people that are more casual than us, even though I consider myself a fairly casual gamer, considering how much I game. But there's people that just don't have nearly as much time. So these mechanics are kind of to try to help level the playing field, but that's never how they end up actually impacting the game. I don't think it's the casual guy who doesn't have time to grind out that ends up with a lot of this pay to win stuff. It's the tryhards that want to be the best and spend way too much time on the game, or this is their game and they want to be the best. So it doesn't level the field like I think the original thought may have been.
Well, I think it's access, it's level to access. Okay. So like something like, I've got a few examples here. Something like Tarkov, where, you get a bigger inventory, and then you get a few items at the start of every wipe and a weapon, a decent weapon. You could get the drop on somebody. The kit isn't that great, but you pay for the game, you pay a little bit more, it expands your slot, so you have a slight advantage because you have more space, right? So it could level it up. But that's pretty much open to anyone, and within the game, you were able to have that size of a stash anyway, but you have to just play the game to get it. And that isn't too much of an issue for me because it's quite personal anyway, depending on how much you play the game. It gives you a weapon or a couple of weapons to begin with, like pretty decent weapons. I think one year you got a scar. But again, your character, you have to level up your character with passive traits, essentially, right, the more you play the game. So if you go in with a scar, you're still going to be as rubbish as everyone else, but you've just got a nicer looking weapon. Maybe a little bit more of an accurate heavy hitter, but yeah, your character, you still have to get their passive traits up. Something that, like, I think DLCs or expansions that did it right, for example, was, if anyone remembers Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, that was a lot of fun. It's very different from the base game, incredibly different, but it was good fun to play. Pay to play, for example, in Call of Duty is actually prevalent at the moment within the DMZ game mode, probably an underplayed game mode. And I think the reason why they're doing it is most likely because it's underplayed, because there's no Warzone packs like this. But they have there was a huge kick up and stink about it, and I thought that they actually took a lot of the stuff off the store, but it turns out they've added a heck of a lot more. And what it does, what you do is you can buy different skins for these characters, right? And normally it's just cosmetic. You'll get like tracer packs where your rounds or your bullets look different. Or if they hit somebody, they may burst into like millions of cubes or get electrocuted. It has no effect on gameplay or damage. It's just visual.
But it's fun.
But it's fun, yeah. What they've done now for DMZ, which is their extraction game mode, is there are operators skins that you can buy, which you essentially get a perk every time you use them. So regardless of normally when you play an operator, you have the smallest bag. You don't have any like perks on your character. You have to earn those by doing missions and then extracting. You don't have a weapon. You don't have anything like a self-revive. Nothing like that. What these in-game purchases allow, these skins, is that every single time you go in with a base character, so let's say you died and then you're using that operator again. Like I actually got one. Every time you go in with that character, if it's at the base level, you can have a 2-plate carrier, which is something you normally need to find in a game. That it's not too difficult to find these in game, but it does give you somewhat of a distinct advantage over somebody who maybe is at the same level as you, especially with skill-based matchmaking, who's just jumping in with another base character. And there's loads of different ones. Like you can go in with a self-revive straight off the bat. You can go in with a large backpack or a medium backpack, and they're expanding that. And it's like, where does that? I think the danger of it is, where does that then start being a balancing issue? You're going to want to sell more skins. You're going to want to sell. You're going to want to give people a slight advantage so that they go, oh, that's a really good pack. I'm going to buy that and spend 18 to 20 pounds or dollars on that skin in your store. Where's the barrier? Where's the ceiling on that? Because if we know anything about the games industry, and generally any industry, it's always about expanding and doing more than you did last time. Gamers in general always want more, not less. You know, there's not a reductive industry in that sense. You know, we are seeing a renaissance with indie games where they are more simplistic, but I do think that the indie game market is pushing a lot of new ideas, narrative ideas, mechanic ideas into the AAA games industry, and they're kind of taking it and trying to implement it in. But at the same time, they are already at a certain size and they already have so much in the game. All they can do is expand. All they can do is make the game bigger. So that also follows on to those kind of purchases. So it's like, well, where does that model stop?
With the indie games, I think the gap between AAA and indie game, as far as product they're putting out, has kind of shrunk, because indie games are creating very engaging stories and very colorful worlds that are beautiful and engaging. I think the access to technologies to make a quality game are out there for them, and they are taking advantage of them, while AAA studios still make the big names. They push the bounds. It's just, it feels like they're in such a rush that they missed some details, and their launches seem to be relatively consistently worse than indie games. So indie games are doing very well. They're making good products that are comparable to the AAAs, and AAAs seem to be kind of slacking on launch, almost relying on the fact that, look, week one, day one, we're going to patch this shortly after, but we need to get it out, figure out what the biggest problems are, then organize and then patch. So AAAs it almost feels like they want to get it out to take the hit so that they can prioritize patching. They rely on patching so much, whereas indie games aren't going to rely on that, because if their game flops on day one, they're not going to get a big enough audience to keep going forward.
And again, like, you know, if their game flops, even if they go into mixed on Steam, let's say, your game is good as dead if it's in mixed. That's the short and end. Yeah, if you're in mixed, you're pretty much dead. Now there's no name for middle-sized studios. I was saying this earlier. you have your indie studios or indie games, and then you have AAA games, but there's really no name for that middle ground.
Right.
And so, look, like Coffee Stain Studios, they're not AAA, but they're not indie. They're kind of somewhere in between. And I think they have replaced what you said about, it's just go back to what we were saying earlier about like the 90s, for example, and the early 2000s, the way games have kind of, again, grown and expanded in scope.
Right.
You used to think about how many studios there were in the early 2000s, like game studios. And these would be somewhat AAA because, again, the indie game market was so small. But over time, it's only the people who are developing those AAA games. It tends to be the same studios, or at least publishers. So the money's being funneled through those publishers or into those developers. There's, like Midway Games don't exist, and even Sega doesn't really produce anything.
Yes.
They rent their IP out.
Essentially, yeah.
Essentially. And so I think what's replaced that market is the indie game market. And the fact that games have become more accessible. Like you can download Unreal Engine, an incredibly powerful, if not the most incredible, the powerful engine that's out there, or at least accessible. You can get that for free. And there's so many asset packs that you can get for free. So if you want to learn how to you want to make a little game, not to say it's easy because it isn't, but it's very accessible, and there's
it's getting more and more so.
Right.
Especially with the addition of like AI to certain aspects of like the Unreal Engine 5 development and stuff like that.
So I think that's a big part of it, but I also think the larger AAA studios tend to, whereas it was a lot of little studios that were considered AAA at the time, now we've got only a few. And I think with that, we have nostalgia for certain games. There's a lot of care taken with certain games.
Yeah.
But I think the leash is a lot tighter on those studios now. And that,
I think your mid-ground for studios, as we're talking about it, is going to fall into this like Bethesda picks up a brand new studio to come out with a game. So because the Bethesda publisher name is attached to it, it's AAA. You have to deal with that. You have to meet that hurdle. But your studio, this is your first entry into anything for your studio. So it's your studio's first major. So you're being ranked as a AAA, but in reality, your studio is not that level. And I think that is kind of where that like middle ground would be in my mind. I don't know if you agree with it, because that's where it feels like a middle area would be, that maybe those guys should have a little bit more buffer from that AAA title, because they're not that studio yet. They're still new. They just got picked up by a publisher that's kind of giving them that credibility.
To
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think volume versus like quantity versus quality is a big thing nowadays as well.
Right.
Because those studios, there are less of them now, or those publishers, there are less of them than there were. And so the reliance on volume and what they're going to release, they become a lot more reliant on a lot of smaller studios and developers to make their content, which means that they're putting a lot of pressure on those studios. So what they're essentially getting back, they're saying, right, can you make the next Silent Hill? Right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to be them that's making them anymore. It's going to be small developers somewhere else. But they are relaying what they want from the game. And I think there's just a lot of cross wires with it. Again, game development takes a long time, even now where it's accessible,
Right.
But also the way that we game is changing and what we want from gaming. You think about 2012, the games that we were playing back then, and then what we're playing now. Some games stand the test of time, but there's no way of knowing if they will or not, Like,
no.
GTA 5 came out, 2012, 2013, and we're still playing
Yeah.
it?
I mean, that's only because GTA Online, though. I don't think if GTA Online didn't exist, GTA 5, I don't think would still be as popular as it is. Online makes the longevity for GTA 5. which is why gamers like me who care about the storyline and want the storyline of GTA 5, I haven't touched GTA 5 in ages, and I want the next Grand Theft Auto because I love it, but like I'm not interested in the online, which is where the player base still is.
What about something like Skyrim? You know, if we're talking about DLC as well, they've had some great DLC come out for Skyrim. You know,
absolutely. But I think Skyrim's still alive mostly because of the modding community.
Absolutely, but then we're going back to individuals. You know,
right?
Which individuals are, individuals and communities are what keep a game alive. If you have a terrible community in a game, it's not going to be long lasting, except for with that community. And I
mean, to be clear, like I'm not saying GTA 5 doesn't deserve to be a game that made it this long, or same with Red Dead, because we played Red Dead Redemption online. But these mods and communities, they keep a game going, but it's not all of the fan base. It depends what hits in that game. And like you were saying, there's no way to tell. So when GTA Online first came out, I don't think it looked like it was going to be the success it is now 10 years later. I think the initial offering of GTA Online probably fell short of the mark compared to where that market is today. The community, they fixed it kind of like No Man's Sky when it came out. Everyone wrote that game off, but because the studio fixed it, developed it, it became a long-term success because the game evolved with the community and for the community. So, like you were saying, it's impossible to tell which game's going to hit and have longevity like that.
I will say that something like GTA has done very well with microtransactions. So much so that, like, my nephew, because he'd play it with my brother-in-law, they spent well over £1,000. 1,000. I don't think I've spent £1,000 in gaming, on games in my life. That's so much money to spend on a game that they don't play anymore. You know?
Yeah. I mean, they found the secret sauce for sure.
And there's a reason why they've taken their sweet ass time to develop GTA 6. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if they were waiting for that sea change to happen with the generation that they thought would be compatible with where they wanted GTA to be. So they weren't going to wait for the PS4 era because they were like, no, we're going to wait for the next generation to come out.
Right.
Because then that will give us some form of future proofing. Because you always get these things where like technology will rise super quickly and then it'll stagnate, and then it'll go super quick and then it'll stagnate. And it's the same pattern all the time. And I think we're at that point now where it's climbing very quickly, but I think we're reaching the top end of where we can be for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Now you could like people can contradict me. Absolutely. That's just where I am. You see that happening all the time. I mean, let's be honest. PS3 was a great console, but the PS4 wasn't that much special. Like that much different.
And both PlayStation and Xbox kind of had half generations this last cycle, which didn't do a whole lot, but
like you look at something like the 1080, which only came out in 2017?
Yeah.
Versus the 4070 or 4090, you know. I think we're going to get to that point again with this generation, and I think what's going to happen is we are going to have the same kind of games being developed or level of games being developed, because it's also supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about the market being dictated by the consumer. Less and less people have money. We've had the big boom of gaming through COVID.
Right.
And now we're on the back end of that. People are watching their pockets a lot, which is understandable. And so I think there was a big push to get the 40 series out, let's say. I think it would be unwise for certain hardware developers to release another card so quickly. And even if they do, I don't think it'll be a flop on the basis that it's a bad card or bad hardware. I just think that other than those hardcore
dollar to value.
it's not going to be as crazy a jump as people think. Like going from a 1060 to a 2060, not a huge jump. Going from a 2060 to a 3060, a little bit of a jump. But going from a 2060 to a 4080, huge, you know?
Yeah.
And I think where we are economically, not just within the world, but also the gaming space, I think that what will happen is, and this is just, I could be wrong, is I think that there's going to be a plateau of games, the size of games that are being developed, the type of games that are being developed.
I mean, I almost feel like we need that. I almost feel like we need that because in some of these launches and optimization cases, it feels like they're trying to push the bounds, which, I mean, let's be realistic. A majority of gamers don't have a 4090 top-end CPU maxed out with DDR5 RAM. Most gamers don't have that. We just can't afford it, but that's what game developers are testing on. That's what they're building on. And I think a lot of these launching problems that we have right now are they're not optimizing for everyone in the mid-range because they want to push the bounds to be the prettiest, fastest, whatever game on the market. So pushing the bounds graphically and visually is the priority, not making an optimized game that a bulk of gamers can play effortlessly.
And I think that mid ground is really going to stand out very soon because, again, I like to look back in the past because it kind of dictates what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
And I still think within gaming in itself, it's still somewhat, it's now like a teenager, right? We came out of the infancy stage, you know, in the mid 2010s, I think. You know, it was already a massive market, but you think about how much it's evolved. Like, it's not just for the few. Gaming has stopped being that thing where it's like, oh, I've got a PlayStation at home and I play it now and again. Like, it's a big industry.
More mainstream.
Huge, way more mainstream. Demographics have changed. The way, you know, the types of games that are being made have changed. You know, you wouldn't expect a cooking simulator to be on PS1, would you? You know, you know, there's a simulator for everything. But you look at the 2000s. Not only were there developers that were of different sizes, still within the AAA space, but also you look at component, like people, like companies that were big for components. You know, even say, let's say Intel or Nvidia, they'd have, you know, entry level cards, mid levels, and then like, you know, top level, high level,
high end,
high end, yeah. That middle has gone. Even the low end has gone. It's more like kind of like middle to high and then high.
Yeah,
you know. And again, talking about consumers, I think consumers are going to dictate the market on it, and where a lot of components are concerned, people just aren't going to be able to afford them, and
it's not going to be worth it. It's not going to be worth compared to what they have versus what they're getting. It's just going to be a give and take, and really, I think game developers need to understand that not everyone's going to be wanting to push the bounds of their PC. It has to be made for the middle market. The middle market has to be the standard. And if you're saying these are the minimum requirements for your game, the game needs to be thoroughly tested on those minimum requirements so that you understand where the state of your game is at launch based on what you're telling people they can play on, not what you want them to play on or think they should be playing on.
Right. Like, the fact that Jedi Survivor is, you know, I mean, I've heard and seen the articles, I'm sure everyone has, but people saying that they're having issues on lower end cards or even on, you know, needing,
like, I saw a review.
12 gig to play the game.
Of someone with a 3090 that was struggling to get 30 frames. Like, that's a problem. That's a higher end still struggling. So like anyone who has mid-range components, which is a majority of gamers, what chance do they have at ever hitting 30 if the higher end of the market can maybe have a shot at hitting 30. And then on top of that, the game company turns around and says it's the gamer's fault for having the wrong addition of windows or for having a CPU GPU bottleneck somewhere. Like, no, it's not our fault. It's the optimization of the game should consider that these factors are normal situations.
Yeah, it's again making a game for, instead of making a game for the current system and future-proofing it, what they're doing is making games for a future system that may be unattainable. I'm just saying right now we're fine, right? Mm-hmm. But if that continues to happen, then people with more entry-level systems, or people who can't afford to upgrade their graphics card, or, you know, because if you upgrade a graphics card, you may have to upgrade your power supply, or you may have to upgrade your board to compensate for the additional power, for example, you know. Memory, like storage is crazy right now, and especially
one piece at the time process. I've been doing it, and like I think every gamer does it, one piece at a time. But I get this, I get to upgrade this.
But those that would been fine a few years ago, right? Like, but now they're becoming so much more expensive because of the need to utilize more intense hardware.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so it's going to price a lot of people out. And the only thing that can happen is a recession of gaming, because expectations won't lower. Either that from the consumer or the player's point of view, or the company's point of view. But when I'm talking about recession, I'm not necessarily talking financially, but I'm talking about the type of products gamers will play, the type of product gamers will buy, which will then directly affect the hardware and AAA market.
We have covered a decent amount of the kind of gaps or problems that we see in the gaming market, but it is not all bad. Like, gaming is still fun. It's still a huge market and people still flock to it. But I guess the way I want to go out, or I think we should go out for this episode, is I would love to hear what each of you thinks is the one thing you would like to see change within the gaming market to push it in the right direction towards the future, where gamers and these companies are more synergized in working with each other, and the overall marketplace is happier.
And I ramble on.
Point? Don't ramble for too long. Come on.
I think it's overcomplicated, but to simplify it, I think both players and studios need to pump the brakes. I think that there needs to be more care for an IP from the developer and publisher side, whether that's time, you know, or community guidance, and definitely some form of, I don't care for regulation as such again, but I think there needs to be more emphasis on, when we're talking about early access, more emphasis on
standards or definitions.
Standards and definitions of how games are released. And I think from the player's point of view, I think expectations need to be lowered entirely, but also, which again,
you get what you get, don't throw a fit.
Well, not so much that. I think it's more so the fact of, if a game is announced and isn't delivered within 3 to 6 months, or they see a YouTube video or a trailer which may not be indicative of the final product, like GTA 6, when they're just showing essentially a pre-alpha of somebody walking through a door. It was all that was a leak of somebody testing
one mechanic
boxes. Yeah. At that point, you're not even into you're not into any part of polishing the game. You are at your very base level
Yeah.
That kind of culture kind of needs to take a break because
Yeah.
again, game development does take a long time, and I think a lot of the issues that are derived from people being disappointed or getting mad at a game are from the aspect of not understanding development in its a game. It's not just, hey, I've got this idea, I'm going to make a character model and then it does all the things I want it to. If you want all of these features in the game, then you have to be patient with it. Otherwise, the pressure's on then the developer to release a bad game or put it in early access. It's
right.
definitely a two to tango situation. So I'm hopeful and positive for that middle ground to exceed and rise up and develop. I think that and develop into what would be the future of AAA games with the values that they hold currently.
Right.
Both of which won't happen, no, but we did say what we would hope. And that's more of a wish than anything.
The pipe dreams. And there are pipe dreams, and that's okay. Hopes and dreams, my dude. What would you like to see happen in the gaming world to help bridge the gap between studios and consumers?
Oh, that's easy. We just fire all of the boards of directors that are in charge of this and prioritize, I don't know, making
so
art,
burn the system to the ground and start over. We did say it was a pipe dream.
I didn't say that, but okay,
not that
sure.
far. Somewhere in between, burn it to the ground and do a hatchet job on it.
No, I think just the boards of directors that are in charge of like monetization and pushing monetized stuff over what anyone wants.
So kind of a shift from
they're giving, like Bethesda. I won't buy Bethesda products anymore. After 76, I'm done. I won't touch them. I don't trust them.
Yeah. So you're almost describing a situation where publishers lose their control and studios have the control over their product and development. So the publisher doesn't dictate everything. It's the studio that gets to decide timelines and
it's a studio's project. If you, as a publisher, want to invest in that, great.
And that's a fair point.
You shouldn't be able to push that developer to put out a fucking garbage game.
Yeah. No, I think that would be a big step.
I would agree with Barbaric here, and just to kind of mirror all sentiments from what we've spoken about, as well as what Hilo was saying in my chat. Essentially, people pay with their pocket. They pay with their pockets. Of course they do.
Where money comes from sometimes.
Yeah. If there is if a company is releasing garbage games, don't buy the sequel to it unless you're 100% certain that it is what it's purported to be. People will pre-purchase. They will wish list. They will support a company, or they will kind of big up a company or developer blindly. Yeah, even if the games are bad. And again, things like loot boxes, things like DLC, all that does is perpetuates the system and perpetuates the patterns of behavior and development cycle. So look, if FIFA are going to release a game every year with just an updated roster and people are buying it, of course they're going to make more, even if it's not a changed game. I mean,
this was kind of going to be my point, I guess, is the thing I want to see change in the scenario is the one thing that gamers can control is I think we need to stop pre-buying games to let developers know that we are not going to purchase a game until we know what it looks like. And my hope with that is that announcements get made a little bit later. We get more information on the IP more consistently so that we're actually getting news about development, which seems like everyone wants to keep these big secrets and not let anyone know what their studios are doing. So we get more news to try to get that interaction or get us hyped for it. And at the end of the day, I think we get better products if the consumer stops prepaying for stuff, we get better end products because companies are reliant on after launch sales, not pre-launch sales. And I think we get more information because I really want studios to open up, because hate to go back to it, but the GTA community is dying for information. We want information, which means this little snippet of working on Collision blows way out of proportion because we have nothing else to go on. They're not sharing where they are or what they're doing. I think if studios open up with information and we stop pre-purchasing, the end product will end up being better and the gamer will be more informed about the development process of their favorite series. That's what I would love to see. And it's also the one thing that I think gamers have the most control over is those pre-purchases.
I do agree with you. I don't want to, obviously, because we're going to be going on, but more food for thought than anything, just to kind of play devil's advocate with that, I guess, is I agree as a community manager myself, and taking a lot of inspiration from other developers that that I enjoy, that I think do it well, and games that I'm interested in. Having that line of communication is honestly solid, and it really sets and manages expectations. On the flip side of that, I would say, especially for AAA game studios, communication is one thing, but there is a danger, I think, in then the gamer dictates how your game performs and how you do as a company and your bottom line. But I think that there is a danger there, in some cases, being dictated by you being managed essentially by the player base. So you want to be able to deliver something creative and something whole, but there is a danger then of it becoming a bit of a muddled mess. Some people, for example, I'm going to use Call of Duty. They loved Call of Duty 2019, Modern Warfare 2019, and some people really like, and some people really hated it. And even some of those people that really hated 2019, they hate Warfare, Modern Warfare 2022. 2023, I can't remember what it's released.
Yeah.
Modern Warfare 2, and they're like, wow, Warzone 1's better. There's a lot of contradiction, and you could be very much in that cycle of trying to please everyone but pleasing no one by being dictated by your core audience. But I think communication and being open and transparent is important, and having a clear single line of communication and community management is incredibly important.
Yeah, and I guess the end of the day sentiment on mine was more that, like, I don't think studios are going to open up and communicate often with us. And, like, I understand they want to keep secrets and they want to be flexible and ambiguous, but I don't think they move anywhere towards communicating with us more unless they have a reason to. And if that reason is reduce interest in the form of pre-orders and stuff like that, I think it's a push to get them to open up, and eventually that middle ground will open up again. But as everything we talk about, it's all food for thought, and we'd love to know everyone's ideas and any thoughts that they have on any subjects we covered. As always, thank you for listening and hanging out, and we will catch you on the next one. And scene.